So Movsar Evloev is going to fight Aljamain Sterling at UFC 307. I don't know what placement on the card that is. I'm guessing it's probably going to be the feature fight or something. Also, Sergey Spivak versus Marcin Tybura are going to have a rematch in an upcoming fight night. And Chris Curtis has called out Paulo Costa for a fight. I don't have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to talk about these announcements and the one potential fight between Chris Curtis and Paulo Costa. So let's just get into it. Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain Sterling. I think this was a really logical next step for Aljamain Sterling in the featherweight division. I like this fight. I think it'll be a lot more exciting than Aljamain Sterling versus Calvin Kattar was. That was not a fun fight at all, but Movsar Evloev being an elite grappler is probably going to cancel out Aljamain Sterling grappling and make this a pretty fun fight. I could see this, at least a large portion of this fight, being on the feet for as long as it goes, and it'll probably go to a decision because Movsar Evloev doesn't get finishes, and Aljamain Sterling generally doesn't either, unless it's a one-armed TJ Dillashaw. So for this fight, I am going to go with Movsar Evloev. I thought about going with Aljo because Aljo is more, I guess you could say he's more proven. He's beat high-level guys. He's a former champion. He had a very dominant performance against Calvin Kattar, you could say. But really, it was just control time. He didn't do any damage whatsoever. The reason I'm going Movsar, though, is because they're both super high-level grapplers, like I said. I trust Movsar can avoid getting submitted by Aljamain Sterling, and I don't see him getting controlled by Kattar. So I could see them scrambling a lot on the ground, and then it ends up on the feet, or it comes down to like whoever does damage when they're on top on the ground. And even though Movsar isn't like a huge ground and pound guy, he was able to rock Arnold Allen on the feet, and he was able to strike with Dan Ige and outstrike him for pretty much the entire time they were on the feet in that fight. He just has better striking than Aljamain Sterling. He doesn't have the craziest striking ever, but he has, I'd say, much better than Aljo, maybe a little less volume. Aljo is definitely more of a volume striker. He showed that in his fights against Petr Yan. Pitter-patter shots all the time, not really anything super powerful. He doesn't really rock anybody. But Movsar was, like I said, able to rock Arnold Allen. Outside of that, he seems to hold his own against these high-level strikers better than I think Aljamain Sterling does. Aljamain Sterling, if he gets put up against really any high-level striker, he's always shooting. And I know Movsar is too, so it's kind of a stupid point to make. I just think when it comes to the striking, Movsar has an advantage. Really, that's all it comes down to. He has the advantage in the skill, and I think that he definitely has an advantage in the power. And I could just see him doing more damage, and this is a damage-based scoring criteria that the UFC goes by. So even if Aljamain Sterling is able to backpack him for half of a round, if Movsar outlands him on the feet or does just a little bit of ground and pound when he gets on top, which I think he will at some point in this fight, he'll end up winning the round based off that, and that's kind of what I'm going off of for this fight. I expect Movsar Evloev to do more damage. I know people don't really like Movsar, and I know a lot of people think that Arnold Allen won their fight. I see where people are coming from that. Arnold Allen was robbed, I should say. Not because of the decision, but because of what the ref did when he landed those knees. The ref saying that it was a grounded knee when Arnold Allen did pick Movsar's hand up off the ground before kneeing him, and the ref stopped the fight. That could have been the end of the fight. The ref did ruin that. But regardless, Movsar still performed very good against Arnold Allen, who I would say is definitely a top 5 featherweight. I think Arnold Allen is extremely good. I think he's very underrated in the featherweight division. Speaking of underrated, I think coming soon I want to do a video about the most underrated top 15 fighter. I want to do the most underrated ranked fighters in each division. Let me know in the comments if you guys think that'd be a good video. But if anybody actually comments. But anyways, yeah, I think Movsar Evloev definitely can beat Aljamain Sterling. He has not a lot of great wins at featherweight, but he has beat a few good guys. He beat Arnold Allen, which is a great win. He beat Diego Lopez. I know Diego Lopez took that on super short notice, but that's shaped, like, that win has aged so good since Diego Lopez has gotten into the UFC, considering Diego Lopez after that fight had no adversity up until he fought Dan Ige. So maybe that win doesn't look as good now that he's fought Dan Ige, but still, that was a very good win. The fact that he made it out of the first couple rounds with Diego Lopez is really impressive. Yeah, that's a great win. And beating Dan Ige, I think, is a bit of an underrated win nowadays. We always look at Dan Ige as kind of this top 15 gatekeeper, which he sort of is. He's sort of a top 15, top 10 gatekeeper. But you have to be really good to just school and dominate Dan Ige. Not many people will school Dan Ige the entire fight, and Movsar Evloev did. So, yeah, I know he's not the most exciting fighter. I know a lot of people don't really like him. But I think he's very good. I think he has what it takes to beat Aljamain Sterling. I think Aljamain Sterling is going to really struggle with the top 5 at featherweight. I think Calvin Kattar was coming off of a really long layoff alongside an injury. He had a lot of ring rust, I think. He kind of froze up in there. He wasn't the same Calvin Kattar we're used to in the past. That's not the same Calvin Kattar that fought Giga Chikadze, And so I think that was like a pretty easy fight to get to like start his featherweight run. And I don't see many other easy fights for Aljamain Sterling. I think Movsar Evloev, even though it makes sense for him to fight him, if I was Aljo, I would have gone for somebody different. I would have gone for like a Yair, who you could maybe muscle around on the ground and control, considering Yair has the least muscle mass of any featherweight ever. Even a Brian Ortega probably would have been a better fight for him. I would not have taken a Movsar Evloev fight if I was Aljo. Should be a pretty good fight. I could see it being pretty exciting, though, considering they're both grapplers. Maybe it'll cancel out. Maybe we'll get a really fun, not-so-technical slugfest on the feet. That's kind of what I'm hoping for out of this fight. If not that, then I'm hoping for some really high-level scrambles on the ground. I'm talking like Beneil Dariush, Diego Ferreira scrambles, or Beneil Dariush, Mateusz Gamrot scrambles, or Mateusz Gamrot, Arman Tsarukyan scrambles. You know what I'm talking about? Just high-level, fast-paced scrambles on the ground. That would be pretty fun to watch. Moving on to the next fight. Another pretty lame fight night main event. I guess we just need to get used to lame fight night main events. That's all that the UFC wants to do now. It's like for every one good fight night main event we get 3 or 4 that nobody cares about. Marcin Tybura versus Sergey Spivak. The rematch, they have fought before, and Marcin Tybura got the decision win. I kind of want to go with Sergey Spivak in this fight. I know he's coming off of a loss to Cyril Gane, whereas Marcin Tybura is coming off of a win over Tai Tuivasa. Those are 2 very different levels of opponents, especially the current version of Tai Tuivasa. He's just not there anymore. Tai Tuivasa really struggling lately to get wins. I believe his last win was Derek Lewis. Since then, lost to Cyril Gane, lost to Sergey Pavlovich. Both those not really wins to be ashamed of. Now losing to Marcin Tybura. Marcin Tybura, definitely a bit of a win one, lose one fighter generally. He beat Tai Tuivasa, and then before that he lost to Tom Aspinall. No shame in that. Tom Aspinall beats everybody. Sergey Spivak, sort of similar. Sergey Spivak, he was kind of on a bit of a run there for a little bit, beating Greg Hardy, Augusto Sakai, and Derek Lewis. I mean, you can call it a run. He beat Derek Lewis into chumps, basically. That's kind of just how heavyweight goes, though, right? I mean, outside of the top 10, or even maybe the top 5, heavyweight just doesn't have much going on. There's not a lot of skill at heavyweight. I expect this fight to be pretty boring. It's either going to be Sergey Spivak gets some kind of a hip throw, muscles Marcin Tybura to the ground, and maybe submits him, or Marcin Tybura is going to push him up against the cage, use the dirty boxing, land some really sloppy shots on the feet when they're striking, and get another decision. I don't see Marcin Tybura really out-grappling Sergey Spivak. Sergey Spivak, I think, is the superior grappler. They did both submit Tai Tuivasa, but yeah, I think I'm going to go Sergey Spivak. It's just not that interesting of a fight. Sergey Spivak did not last quite as long as Marcin Tybura against Aspinall. I guess there's that. I think Marcin Tybura was able to land like 2 okay punches against Aspinall, so maybe he's the better fighter. I'm going to go with Sergey Spivak, though. I think Sergey Spivak, he's going to get his takedowns. I think he's going to land a little bit of ground and pound. I don't think he's going to sink into submission. I think Marcin Tybura is good enough on the ground to avoid getting submitted by a Sergey Spivak. I don't think Marcin Tybura would avoid getting submitted by like a Jailton Almeida. I don't think he'd avoid getting submitted by Tom Aspinall if Tom Aspinall tried to submit him instead of just knocking him out. I don't think he would avoid getting ground and pounded and finished by Curtis Blades, but I do think he can probably survive getting submitted by Sergey Spivak. But I am going to go Sergey Spivak. I think he's just going to get the takedowns. I think he's going to land some decent shots. It'd probably be like a 29-28. I could see Marcin Tybura stuffing the takedowns and getting the better of Sergey Spivak on the feet for one of the rounds out of the fight. I mean, he had a pretty competitive fight against Alexander Volkov, to be honest. Marcin Tybura did. Volkov beat him by decision, but it wasn't a crazy dominance decision. It was clear, but Tybura did pretty good, and Volkov's been on, quite a streak lately. Volkov's looking improved every single fight, so that speaks well for Tybura. But that could have just been a bad night for Volkov, man. Tybura... see, now I'm kind of wanting to pick Tybura. I just can't... Some of these heavyweights are weird because and I'm sure I'm not the only one who does this, you look at all these heavyweights like the Tyburas and the Spivaks and the Tuivasas and the Sakais and the Derek Lewises, and you just think they're all a coin toss. It's kind of like women's MMA in that way. You might think one's better than the others, but really it's not. It's just who's going to win on the night. I'm going to stick with my pick of Sergey Spivak. I think Sergey Spivak's going to get it done by decision. That's all for that fight because I don't think anybody really cares. The last thing I want to talk about today, Chris Curtis called out Paulo Costa. I don't really think he's going to get the fight, but I feel like it could be an interesting fight. And Paulo Costa might accept it for reasons that we'll get into, so I figure we can talk about it. The reason I say Paulo Costa might accept it is mostly because I think Paulo Costa probably wants a fight he can win. Paulo Costa, I don't think, has the warrior spirit nowadays that a lot of fighters have. I don't think Paulo Costa wants to fight a really tough matchup. I could see him fighting Chris Curtis and saying yes to this call-out just because it could get him in the win column, which I believe that it would. I would pick Paulo Costa to beat Chris Curtis. I think Chris Curtis is a good fighter. He's got good boxing. He has good power. My problem with Chris Curtis, though, he struggles to close the distance on guys, for one, which I don't think would be a huge deal against Paulo Costa. It's not like Costa is the most elusive fighter ever. But Chris Curtis also, he seems to give up on himself when people make it difficult for him. I mean, this was a big thing in the Jack Hermanson fight. And even in the Marcos Rogério de Lima fight. That was who it was, right? Let me check that. It was like Chris Curtis's last fight. Chris the Action Man Curtis. It wasn't his last fight, sorry. Marc-Andre Barriault. Why did I say Marcos Rogério de Lima? It's not even the right division. Marc-Andre Barriault. Yeah, he did that in that fight too. Whenever guys are like backing up against him, he just seems to he like throws a fit over it. And I know he beat Marc-Andre Barriault, but it was a close fight, and the Jack Hermanson fight wasn't close at all. Jack Hermanson schooled him, and he like basically throws a fit because somebody's not letting him punch them in the face. I remember a lot of people were kind of trashing Jack Hermanson for the way that he fought Chris Curtis, but I mean, you can't even blame him. The dude fought backing up, landing teep kicks and jabs the whole time, and people act like he was just running away the whole fight. He was on the back foot, being technical, landing good kicks, calf kicks, teep kicks, the jab, landing the jab on him, the 1-2. It was actually a really good performance by Jack Hermanson. I don't understand why anybody was trashing him for that fight. It's weird that people were trashing him for that, and those are probably the same people that think Israel Adesanya is like a striking mastermind, because honestly, Jack Hermanson's performance against Chris Curtis was like a more exciting version of Israel Adesanya versus Vettori or versus Cannonier. Yeah, he was just picking him apart from the outside, but he was very active doing it. Like, Jack Hermanson never really let up on the strikes, and Chris Curtis couldn't do anything to him. He couldn't get him. He couldn't track him down. Chris Curtis doesn't cut off the cage. He just follows. He literally just walks forward. He doesn't have much for footwork when he's trying to catch somebody. When he's in the pocket, he does. When he's in the pocket throwing hands with you, he does. But when he's trying to get to the pocket, when somebody's backing up from him, and they're circling the cage, he doesn't seem to know what to do. He just follows them. And then he throws a fit when he can't catch them with his hands. And maybe that's not super relevant against Paulo Costa, but Paulo Costa in his last fight, he did a lot of backing up against Sean Strickland. And sure, that's because Strickland was putting on the pressure. But I could see Paulo Costa backing up against Chris Curtis a bit when Chris Curtis, tries to throw his hands at him, just throws an overhand or a 1-2. I could see Paulo Costa kind of backing up and Chris Curtis missing, and then Paulo Costa catching him with his check left hook or something like that. And if they ever do slug it out, I think Paulo Costa is a slightly better striker. I don't think he's great. I can't decide if he's underrated or overrated at this point. Some people think that Paulo Costa is still like a top 5 striker at middleweight, and some people think he is awful and shouldn't even be ranked. I definitely think he's somewhere in between. He was able to strike pretty good with Whitaker, if people forget that fight. I know he backed up the whole time and did nothing against Strickland, but he had a good fight with Whitaker, landed a wheel kick that somehow didn't knock him out, landed some good shots in that fight. He has a pretty good jab. He has not a lot of power, but he actually has good volume. And yeah, I could see him and Chris Curtis kind of slugging it out. And man, I was just going on this whole time about how Chris Curtis is like weak-willed, and that's why I would pick against him. But the thing is, Costa's kind of weak-willed too, isn't he? Costa doesn't really react to getting hurt that good. Even in like the Vettori fight, and Vettori doesn't have crazy power. When Costa gets hurt, he kind of shells up and backs away. I still think Costa can beat Chris Curtis. Chris Curtis lost to Kelvin Gastelum. So that's kind of like enough said there, isn't it? I think Costa can get it done. I think he could outvolume Chris Curtis, land better shots, not finish him, because Costa doesn't tend to TKO people anymore, and he doesn't have one-punch knockout power. If anybody's getting a one-punch knockout, it's Chris Curtis, which I still don't think would happen, because Paulo Costa does have an underrated chin, unless he's fighting Israel Adesanya with one boob, because Israel Adesanya is totally not on steroids. But yeah, I would go with Paulo Costa in that fight. Do I think that fight's going to happen? Not really. I think Paulo Costa is probably going to fight someone more highly ranked. I could see Paulo Costa fighting. I wouldn't be surprised if they did Paulo Costa versus Jared Cannonier. I think that'd be a sweet fight. I'd rather have that fight. I feel like that could be next, unless Jared Cannonier fights Khamzat Chimaev. But yeah, I could see Paulo Costa and Jared Cannonier fighting. I hope that fight happens. I want that fight. I want Robert Whitaker to fight Sean Strickland. I want to get the Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya fight over with. Winner of Whitaker-Strickland fights for the belt. Khamzat, stop pulling out of fights. Fight Nasruddin Imavov or something like that. And then the winner of that can fight whoever wins between the winner of du Plessis, Israel Adesanya, and the winner of Whitaker-Strickland. I'm hoping it's Whitaker. Let's get Whitaker versus Khamzat for the belt in like a year and a half. That'd be sweet. Anyways, that's enough rambling. Let me know what you guys thought of these fights. If you liked the video, hit the like button. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.